I'll be talking about the idea of the tipping point itself as an idea and how it potentially affects the solutions that we find. So I'll begin with an example that we're all familiar with and that's been brought up already, the smartphone. The smartphone as we know it began with the launch of the first iPhone in 2007, and we couldn't have known 10 years ago that it was not only going to be the tipping point for mobile internet, making the internet portable, but also for the touchscreen technology that is the preferred user interface of our time. Let's take a look at what some people whose job it is to know about this stuff and write about technology had to say about the original iPhone. My favorite is, once the initial fever wears off, sales will be disappointing because it has no buttons or keys. Right? The thing is, there are so many products and so many different predictions about them. How do we know which ones are going to come true? The tipping point as an idea is surrounded by an aura of magic and hope. That's why we have a whole forum on it today. Gladwell's rhetoric helps us to identify it as a phenomenon, something that we can see through patterns that happens actually out in the world. But I think that the reason that we're so enamored with the idea of the tipping point is because it's connecting us to something much deeper, which is our relationship to uncertainty. If you think about it, when we set out to solve a problem, we do so because there's something about it that we don't yet know. Right? That's why we're giving it our attention. So we can see that, for example, with fossil fuels. We have been having so many problems with fossil fuels lately, right? And so there's people who are working on sustainable energy sources. Anyone who's ever worked on a tipping point or just any project in general will know that it's the hope of a breakthrough, some sort of positive outcome that keeps those thankless tasks going. So we begin to see that the process of creativity is actually tied not to what we already know, but actually to what we don't know, uncertainty. For example, you may have heard of Elon Musk's efforts at electric cars, right? When we have the idea of the tipping point behind us, what we have is the idea of a breakthrough that's kind of ramped up. The attraction is clear. If only we knew the tipping point, then this idea could be launched to the peak of its success at any moment. It's because of hope that we are attracted to try to predict these tipping points, because it feels like when it does work, it works a bit like magic, right? What's really happening is we're taking patterns that we've identified from things that have happened in the past, and we're making a whole new category with which to think about the future. Now, we wonder if we think hard enough, if we work hard enough towards it, might we be able to control the future a little bit and put some of that magic to work? What we're really dealing with is how the unknowable future is inspiring us to take action today. Now, this is not really anything new. For example, Aristotle spoke about the effects of wonder about 2,300 years ago. But I think that we do need to be concerned with what this way of thinking means for us today. Most of us are in the business of trying to change the world for the better, right? We have the hope of the tipping point that if only we knew the area of the next tipping point, we could direct our energies more effectively so that they wouldn't be wasted. They'll go towards something that's really going to make a difference. So, for example, I'll ask you a question. The problem is uncertainty, right? I think that 3D technology is going to be an important technology in the future. But how are we going to really be able to know? The only way we'll be able to know is with hindsight. Now, what this means is that the tipping point is actually categorically unknowable. Okay, but that's okay. It's really okay. This is the good news. It's because it's unknowable. It's because the future is a blank slate that we can project our hopes and dreams onto it. We know a couple of things about the tipping point so far. It's a phenomenon that occurs in the world. It's unknowable, and it works through a narrative of hope. Okay, now we've laid out the relationships between ideas and uncertainty, hope, and the unknowable future. We can really begin to question it. That's what I'm going to encourage you all to do. Starting with, what does this mean for us? Right? How do we make decisions when the future is so uncertain? Now, some of you might say, all we can really do is make our best guess, and we hope for the best. The thing is, we seem to have gotten a little too good at guessing. Prediction, as you know, is a big industry, and in places like business and in economics, it's an established field, right? But could what we call prediction really be a self-fulfilling prophecy? The thing is, when we have an idea like the tipping point, which is quite exciting, we might think that it's something that happens on its own. But could it be that when we are thinking ahead, we're actually acting accordingly as well? So when predictions are made, they're generally followed with investments, time, resources, energy, right? This means that even if the future is unknowable, we can still influence it by the amount of effort that we put into it, right? For example, going back to Apple, everyone's favorite example, Apple spent $150 million on the original iPhone. And so we see it's not just hope or Steve Jobs' vision or a receptive market that made it the great product that it is. It's also the resources that went into its development. So we begin to see how powerful the stories that we tell ourselves are. The narrative of hope embodied in the tipping point keeps this ship of change and progress afloat by encouraging us to pour our time, energy, and efforts into the work that we do. But my question to you is, how do we know which version of the story is the best one to get the correct changes and the right direction that we want to be moving in? Right? How do we know? And who are we leaving in charge of telling this story? I'd like to go into an analogy that we're very familiar with. It's the phenomenon of going viral, right? We know that the phenomenon going viral works in social media, and the idea is that all you have to do is put yourself out there, and this network of connections, the magic, goes to work for you, right? Now, in our media culture, to capture the imagination of the users, you then get propulsed, you go by the power of the network. And the social media network is built on the idea of democracy, right? Everybody has an equal say in this social network. So another similarity that going viral and the tipping point share is that they both share in the unknowable future. We can't really know with any certainty what the next thing to go viral will be. Why is that? Well, it's because in its aim, media itself has not ever really changed, right? It's still facing the same age-old problem, which is how do you influence views in a democracy when you can't tell people what to think? Going viral in its process then is just like putting a product or service out there on the market, which people either buy or not. It's possible because the idea goes into the public domain and then it's made or broken by the rate of peer-to-peer sharing. So the democratic network of the social media means that anyone has the power to potentially reach exponentially beyond their own little network of friends without any extra effort. Right? This is the power of the internet today. How many of you think that viral videos are spontaneous? Wow, nobody. We have a very enlightened audience, right? The viral video is one of the biggest myths of the social media age. Most of them are engineered by ad agencies, right? You could just do a simple Google search on any of them. But what I'd like to point out is what we get in our average users, yours and mine, online lives, is largely a reflection of the real world, right? It's driven by the market. And I don't just mean online shopping, but blogs, video platforms, social media networks, everything that's powered by ads and sponsorships is actually driven by the market. And it's because it all has to monetize in order to provide the services that we love to live our lives through, to keep our enjoyment of it going, right? They aren't really the bad guys. I think that we need to question ourselves about the way we occupy the internet and what our participation in it really means. I'm sure that you know YouTube, which was the original broadcast media democratization. We went from receiving broadcasting to being able to broadcast ourselves. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and YouTubers are their own celebrities and they have their own fan bases, and it works almost exactly like regular media, just completely separate from it, right? So my point is that democracy doesn't necessarily exclude capitalism. Like I said, corporations need to make a profit, right? But I think that we should question ourselves about whether what we share on social media is really our own ideas or whether they're being selected from ideas that have been pre-produced for us. But what does this have to do with us at TEDx? Right? We really are more concerned with important issues. We want to change the world and make it a little bit better than when we first came. Right? We hope our legacy will go beyond a funny video, but we in fact want to make a difference with our project. Right? In fact, project means to project, as in to send a little piece of yourself out into the world, to live in your ideas and your work and hopefully make a little difference. But is lasting change possible in the media climate in which we live? The phenomenon of going viral shows us how short people's attention spans are, right? The culture of quick turnaround and minute content, and it's all driven by the market. Is it ever possible to have real value and real solutions in this kind of environment? What does it mean when our work occupies the same framework and the same audience as internet entertainment? I would like us to question together if we have grown too accustomed to minute content and whether it's a sign of how our attention spans have grown shorter for the real questions as well, not just for the entertainment. In order to do our jobs as social analysts well, and I think that's why we come together at events like this to really analyze how things are going, I think that we need to step back and think critically, even about ideas that we really love, like the tipping point, right? Could the tipping point be a symptom of the larger problem rather than the solution? Does it show us how we're addicted to constantly chasing the next big thing. Remember, it's wonder, uncertainty, and hope, all the products of not knowing that drive ideas and change. But what happens when we become addicted to trying to predict the future and trying to get the results that we want? Is it possible that we're replacing solutions with just more uncertainty? Because even if we have a really great solution, it won't really have the time to matter to us before we're on to the next thing. Could we need to get away from the idea that we need to make the future knowable? Because I think to predict the future is to determine the future. Like, for example, when we try to identify a tipping point. So I think that the network of connections that we occupy and that we gather around should be widened from what we already inhabit, right? And I'd like to ask you, rather than trying to engineer the future, could we look at the tipping point as an example of how we've just generated uncertainty and risk without looking to real permanent solutions? And if we are always moving towards our predictions, should we at least be paying a careful look at what those predictions are and who is in charge of making them? And back them up with resources, of course. At any point, do we stop to consider why the trends that we occupy, like selfies or Korean culture, exist and who they really benefit? This forum on the tipping point is at the nexus of these concerns. So I would like to ask you, if we think that there are things about our world that are amiss, but we're too caught up in the moment to stop and really question them, are we going to be able to do anything about them? Thank you.